Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. We're just waiting for Laura Trott, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, to be prepared for our interview. In the meantime, I'm going to bring Matt Goodwin in and ask you a little bit about what I'm going to talk to Laura Trott about. Matt's the Professor in Politics and Pollster, does a lot of polling for us at GBNews, so thank you very much for that, Matt.
Good morning.
We're going to come back to you a bit later in the show, but just give me a taster, because I found it interesting to see this morning that the Prime Minister's doubling down on his 5-point plan. He says the plan is working and I'm going to stick with the plan. The plan isn't working, though, is it?
No, it isn't. If you look at the polling, the latest polling that's come out over the last few days, we've done this with GBNews, the Conservatives are in deep trouble. They're flatlining in the 23-24% range of the national vote. We've just had Damien Green in the studio saying, well, they hope voters are going to feel the big economic recovery. We know they're not. If you ask voters today, are things getting better or worse for you? More than half the country say things are getting worse. 2/3 say they want to see change in Westminster. They're very pessimistic about the cost of living crisis, but also, as we saw in that exchange between Michael Portillo and Damien Green, immigration. If you look at those 2019 Conservative voters, Boris Johnson's voters, the top issue for all those voters is not the cost of living crisis, it's stopping the boats, the number one priority. So Rishi Sunak, he can say, look, we're sticking to the plan, but as far as voters out there are concerned, it's not cutting through. They're not feeling the decline in inflation. They're not seeing progress on the small boats, and generally they feel that Britain is moving in the wrong direction.
That's interesting, because Damien Green was quoting the Clinton aide who said it's about the economy stupid, and that seems to be going against the grain of what you're saying and what you're finding in your surveys. Also, the timing's interesting, isn't it? Because we had John Sargent on at the beginning of the show saying, wouldn't it have been better for them to plump for a spring election? Then they don't have another summer of small boat arrivals, upsetting the apple cart if they go to the polls in the autumn.
Well, there's no good date for the Conservative Party. Let me tell you, I was running a focus group in Stoke-on-Trent recently. There's one word that's going to define this election: security. This is what voters are wanting. They're wanting economic security from the cost of living crisis. They're wanting physical security from the collapsing NHS and also, by the way, increasing crime. They're wanting national security from the small boats and spiralling immigration. And they're wanting cultural security from this very oppressive political correctness, all the woke ideology stuff. Whoever taps into that word security is going to win this election. And Rishi Sunak's problem is that he's gone into the casino of British politics and he's put all of his chips on this 5-point plan. But so much of that plan is outside of his control. The global economic wins, the small boats, the international legal obligations that we have. And so I think he's going into 24, Camilla, in a very, very weak position, actually. And I say, if you look at the polling numbers, we'll come back and talk about them in more detail. We're looking at not just a heavy defeat for the Conservative Party, but a historic defeat for the Conservative Party. And this is the real issue. So I think number 10 are going to be increasingly panicking as they go through the next few weeks and months.
We're going to get on to, when you come back with me, talking about reform, talking about whether Nigel Farage at the helm of reform will improve things. I'd like you to talk me through those numbers a little later. What did you make of the news that Rishi Sunak had turned to, of all people, Dominic Cummings for electoral advice?
I mean, I'm not surprised that that meeting was held, when you consider that Rishi Sunak is also advised by James Forsyth, who was at The Spectator, where Dominic Cummings...
Yes, it's all very cosy.
A very insular connection going on there. Look, I mean, we all have different views about Dominic Cummings. My view is, you know, a fruitcake could have won a 2019 general election because people were so fed up. They wanted Brexit done, and it just happened to be Boris Johnson, and Cummings just happened to be there. I've never bought into this kind of narrative that he's an election genius. And I think some of the things that he's been talking about, how he'd change Britain around a sort of, you know, high-tech technocracy, reforming civil service. Well, that's not where voters are right now, OK? To go back to it's the economy stupid, actually today, it's the culture stupid.
Yes.
It's not just a cost of living crisis. It's a sense out there in the country that the institutions aren't representing the values and the voice of the British people. The elites aren't representing the values and the voice of the British people. And the corridors of power are steadily moving further and further away from the average voter. And I think, you know, one of my colleagues this week, John Curtis, someone I really get on with, really respect, John made the good point. He said, look, the Conservatives are under attack now on two sides, Reform and Labour. I would add to that. I think they're under attack on three sides, Reform Party, Labour Party and apathy. I think lots of people out there are just not going to bother voting at all. And I think the 2019 Conservatives are saying, look, we turned to Boris Johnson because we wanted a revolution in this country. It wasn't just about Brexit. Changing immigration, high skill, high wage immigration, new Australia-style policy. We wanted the institutions reformed. We wanted levelling up to be a success. We didn't want London getting everything. We wanted Brexit to really mean Brexit, to have real divergence. We wanted a different political economy in this country that works for everybody, not just the top 5%. And I think because the Conservatives then struggled and, I would argue, failed to really deliver on that revolution that people were asking for, so many of them in my focus groups now are saying, well, I'm just not going to vote at all because I see Labour as a continuation of the status quo. I see the Conservative Parliamentary Party as not really being interested in shaking up the status quo. They don't really yet know enough about reform. Yes, Richard Tice is doing well. They're up to 10%, 11% in the national polls. I would argue, Camilla, reform should be on 25%.
Yes.
I mean, in the current context of these unresolved issues over migration, the biggest cost of living crisis for 50 years, I think reform should be on 25%.
Although you could say that, I mean, I know the Labour Party are well ahead, but they could even be further ahead. You're talking about apathy. That also suggests that it's not like 1997, where you've got a load of Tories actively right now planning to defect to Labour because they're going, yeah, Keir Starmer as Prime Minister. They're clearly not saying that in the same way that they did with Tony Blair.
Absolutely. So if you look at the polling numbers today, take all of those Boris Johnson voters from 2019, where are they going? We've got about 40% staying with the Conservatives.
Right.
We've got about 15% going to Labour. We've got nearly 1 in 4 going to Reform, about 23%. A larger number, by the way, are saying, I don't know who to vote for. I'm not going to vote. I refuse to answer your question. So we've got a lot of Conservatives out there who are telling me as a pollster, chances are I'm going to stick at home, right? Chances are I'm not even going to participate in the election. And this is a big problem for Sunak. You know, where's the big motivational narrative? Where's the big inspirational story about how he's going to change Britain, how he's going to completely reshape the country? Where's that big, compelling, get off your sofa at home and come out and vote Conservative? Because voters are clearly not feeling it. Now, Keir Starmer certainly isn't setting the country on fire. His leadership ratings are pretty flat. But as the old saying goes, right, governments, oppositions don't need to win elections, governments lose elections. And this is basically where we're at with British politics at the moment. No widespread burning enthusiasm for either left or right. Lots of voters crying out for change. Our first past the post system makes that very difficult. And this, I think, is where we are today.